Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it. All right, here we go. Session 92. Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast, inching closer and closer to that 100th session officially. Blue Jays season came to a tragic end today. So for those Blue Jays fans out there, a good run. It doesn't come down to the final day, but comes down to the final day. So as always, our sponsors, First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, EPOCH, and Benchmark Athletics, in association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. A really special guest. Been looking forward to this. I had to reschedule. We've had to reschedule a couple times here to make this happen. So Kevin, really appreciate you being here. I'll introduce Kevin and then we'll jump in. This is going to be a really interesting discussion here with him leading the way on his path, his journey in the military. Kevin Malahy, reconditioning manager for the 3rd Canadian Division Support Base, Edmonton. He is our guest this evening. He is a Master's of Science in Wellness Management from the University of Central Oklahoma. His specializations include the CSEP CEP, NSCA CSCS, and Westside Barbell Special Strength Certificate. With more than 16 years of experience in high performance, rehabilitative, and recreational strength and conditioning, Kevin's vast resume includes experience working with clients ranging from the age of 7 to 68, and a specialization in combat sports and tactical populations. He's managed and delivered the training, weight management, and rehabilitation of athletes represented in the UFC, Bellator, Invicta FC, Dana White's Contender Series, USA Sambo, the ADCC, and multiple local promotions. He has operated as head coach, programmer, and manager of multiple CrossFit facilities from 2009 to 2017, and has even dabbled in planning, coordinating, and operating a series of local fitness events in the Oklahoma City metro area with up to as many as 470 competitors. His current employment is with the Canadian Forces Morale and Welfare Services in the arm of personnel support programs. He is the reconditioning manager for 3CDSB Edmonton. A brief summary of his area of responsibility includes case file management of military personnel in Alberta and Mainland BC, participating in PSP-led reconditioning programs. He works with special populations, including, but not limited to, a variety of musculoskeletal disorders, obesity, multiple sclerosis, diabetes, cancer, COPD, and ankylosing spondylitis, again, just to name a few. His additional duties, responsibilities, and roles also include he is the Canadian Armed Forces Grappling Head Official, the committee secretary and co-founder to the NSCA's Combat Sports Special Interest Group, and an Edmonton Combative Sports Commission Committee member. Kevin Malahy, a mouthful of some amazing things. What a resume. A pleasure to have you on board. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, just a completely diverse resume, background. You mentioned in the sort of the preamble leading up to this, baseball and wrestling were sort of high school and younger years. A lot of wrestling. How did that sort of passion begin, or how did you fuel that in your younger years? And then I would love to sort of just have you walk us through your path to where you're at now. You're in Edmonton from Oklahoma originally, and how you're supporting the most important athletes on the planet.
Wrestling. Well, you kind of have a handful of sports you can choose from. Being a boy from Oklahoma, wrestling, football, baseball, they're kind of all in your top picks.
Right.
But yeah, so wrestling. I kind of jokingly say I'm the youngest and smallest of three boys, so it kind of happened organically. I just learned to wrestle back. Was more what happened.
Yeah.
My neighbors, when we moved, when I was relatively young into a new neighborhood, my neighbors had three boys in their family as well. And they were all 1 year, kind of in a stair-step fashion, 1 year older than each of my siblings and myself, respectively. And they were all at different levels, had been state champion wrestlers. And we had open backyards. So I learned to fend for myself there. And I started actually attending wrestling practice with them. My mother and their mother were close friends. And that was kind of where my wrestling started. And then I kind of dabbled in and out of other sports growing up. So, so always been involved, always been really passionate about martial arts, though. I was always really enthralled with, I was a JCVD guy. I loved the old Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. I was super into Ninja Turtles and anything that had, threw kicks and wielded a sword. I was pretty into as a young kid. So,
all right.
That's always been a passion of mine. And then that's kind of evolved over time as far as what my understanding of martial arts are and what types of different types of martial arts rather that I've been involved in. But grappling's kind of always been my home. So after high school, I went straight into the Marine Corps. Interestingly enough, and I think is something that kind of came full circle into my current career, I actually exited through a medical separation as well. And then once I got out of the military, my expectation when I went in was that was going to be my entire life. I wasn't going to do anything else. I had made it. That was my end state. And I just had to, coast through my career or whatever it was that was, I didn't really have it planned out that well, obviously. So when that came to a halt, then it was, I tried a handful of things. The one consistent part of my life at that point in time, as far as figuring out what I wanted to do, was I knew how to get up in the morning and go work out.
Right.
So I was working out at a local gym. This guy named Frank Angelillo, he was a retired Marine. And so he kind of took me under his wing and he said, hey man, you're up here enough that you might as well get paid to be here. So I got my first little local training certification in 2005 through NFPA, it's National Fitness Professionals Association, I think is what the acronym was. But it was a guy named Mike Atterbury that was a local bodybuilding and powerlifting coach that also worked with special populations. He's pretty knowledgeable. And he created that certification. That was my gateway in. And then from that point forward, as I went to school, my actual bachelor's are in criminal justice and forensic science. I thought I wanted to be an attorney. And then I went down that road, and the closer I got to it, I just decided that wasn't probably what I wanted to do, but I finished my degree plans because that was the track I was already on. And I was training athletes all along that time. I was doing martial arts as my own recreation. And during that time, I actually met a handful of people that have influenced my life since then. A good friend of mine is a guy named Brandon Bowen. He's now getting ready to pick up lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force, but he's done a handful other, you think my resume is long. This guy's rap sheet is, an entire ream of paper probably with all the things that he's done. So we were training at a gym together and we were kind of co-coaching. He did it as just like a extra kind of side gig to have something to do in the evenings, I guess. I don't know. He didn't need it for any reason. He just enjoys coaching. And so we had a discussion one time during that time about one of his deployments. And he had mentioned during one of his deployments that he had a relatively close, I don't know if it was a friend or an acquaintance, to be honest. I can't recall what their actual relationship was beyond being in the same unit during the deployment. But he had an individual during that deployment that was riding in an armored vehicle that was flipped by an IED. and he was okay from the blast. To my understanding, the other passengers in the vehicle were actually killed from the blast. He survived the blast. The vehicle was turned on its side, and the engine compartment caught fire, and that individual was not strong enough to actually open the armored door. And so he died as a result of the fire that came on the tail end of that, just because he didn't have the physical strength to open the door.
Wow.
And so Brandon mentioned to me that had completely changed his perspective. Now, Brandon's a big boy from East Texas. He probably was strong enough as is, but then that further fueled his passion to actually get into doing more structured weightlifting and making sure that that was never going to be him. And so that story was something that I obviously remembered, but didn't really resonate with me on a deeper level until a couple of years later. And this is when I had already started my master's at this point. And I started working with an individual that is or at the time, he was the CEO of the 45th Infantry Reserve, I guess they were National Guard, not Reserve, National Guard unit in Oklahoma, is a guy named Colonel Jordan. And he was coming to our gym and he was getting ready to deploy. Now, the likelihood that Colonel Jordan's going to get put in that type of situation is probably pretty low, just given the nature of his rank and his involvement at that unit. But he actually asked me, he said, what should my standards be? What should I be looking at, before I deploy? And that image kind of popped in my mind of what Brandon told me. So I shared that story with him, which of course his eyes got bright-eyed, and he knows Brandon. It's a pretty small community. His eyes got, bright-eyed, and he was like, yeah, let's do that. Let's definitely work on that, right? But in that moment for me, that was when I really gained an interest to have kind of this deeper involvement with tactical populations and started kind of investigating that side of things more from the ability to be a trainer as opposed to actually being the military population myself. Because I finally had that moment of, this is a population of people that I can see a direct correlation into what I do actually having a drastic impact on their life beyond just being, for the most part, the individuals I was working with at the time were combative sports, so it's more of like a pride thing. But this is like the difference between potentially coming home or not, the impacts the family that they have, whether it's their wife and kids or whatever. And so it just, that kind of full circle moment of like, I've been there enough to kind of have an understanding of it. I've been through the medical process, and now I'm out. So now I have this unique opportunity to do what I refer to as being a force multiplier, where I can touch more lives realistically in the military, probably than I would have as a military service member myself. I have a unique opportunity to give back in a way that I didn't necessarily get the same kinds of treatment on my way out because I wasn't in for very long. Right. So when I went through my medical process, it was more like you go through it and they're like, well, you're relatively early in the process. And they just start kind of shoveling you out because the U.S. military is a revolving door. And that's not to discredit them or anything. That's just the way it works out. So now it's like, okay, I've got this population of people where I can touch their lives on a much deeper level. So there's that fulfillment. I can give back. I didn't get to be a career guy in the military like I wanted to, but here's a way that I can give back, and I can probably touch the lives of more military personnel than I would have in this capacity than I would potentially as a service member. So that just felt like all the stars were kind of aligning in that way. And so that became my fuel moving forward, was that even if it wasn't military populations, I wanted to work with a tactical population. So law enforcement or fire or military, any one of those kind of fit that mold. And then fast forward to me being here. So I met my current wife, Lisa, and she's from Alberta. So she's lived in the St. Albert area the better part of her life. And I was finishing my master's. She was already set in her career. I've lived away from home. She hasn't. So when we started doing the whole who's going to move where thing, it made exponentially more sense for me to come here. So once I moved up, the first job that became available to me, interestingly enough, was working within the reconditioning department at 3CDSB in Edmonton. And I kind of jokingly say, you can call it divine intervention. You can say it's luck. But it was one of those things where there were several other jobs that had popped up that I'd applied for. Alberta Health Services as kinesiologist. There were some other things that popped up, and my working permit hadn't come in yet, so I couldn't actually work for any of them. They passed me by, and within about a week of the time that my working permit came to fruition, the reconditioning manager at the time, Aaron Tresser, actually called me and said, "Are you still interested in that job?" I said, "Yes, I am." And so it was one of those things that, again, you can call it what you want to call it, fate or whatever, but it was almost perfect timing for me. And it just so happened to be a career path that I was really interested in. And here I am. So that's the abbreviated version as to how I ended up here over the course of basically giving you 36 years of my life. But that's it in a nutshell.
Well, an amazing journey, and I was constantly looking down, just making notes, and there's so many things that we could talk to on this. Really appreciate you sharing that, because it just shows the diversity in where we think we're going, when we think we've met, our ultimate endpoint, or we've achieved everything that we were supposed to, and I'll just sit in cruise control, get complacent, mail it in, and then I'll be at retirement. And then something shifts or changes, or in this case, I think, like, you meet passion with people along the way, and it's amazing to hear you say that story at first didn't resonate with you, but then you're working with personnel that story may resonate. You share that story from inside the armored vehicle, and it lights somebody else up, and that's a bit of an aha moment for you. And I think for all of us that are listening to this and engaging with this story, and I don't mean to minimize it as a story, but I really think everybody's path is truly a story, and there's so many learning lessons in each. And when you can share things like this, it really resonates on this end with myself, certainly, because you think you're at that pinnacle, and then all of a sudden something happens or something changes, and you go off shift a little bit. I would have said coincidence, 7 years ago, but now I would say there's no such thing as coincidence. And exactly it. Call it fate, call it divine intervention, call it luck, whatever it is. This was meant to be, and it really sounds maybe a little cliched, maybe a little cheesy, but when we get to these years of our life where we're making decisions that are going to sort of be impactful and fruitful for other reasons than getting to the finish line, so to speak. Yeah. It really, to me, comes off sounding like you're exactly where you're supposed to be, and impact. We'll go into, I'm sure, a bunch of this as we go through. I just want to try and get as much of that off my chest, because it was just lighting me up listening to your story. And I think, similarly on this end, worked really hard and really strictly and professionally, and had to have, khaki pants and a collared shirt tucked in all the time. And I didn't have any tattoos at the time. It's all flipped on its head now. Shirts untucked, no khakis, and lots of tattoos, and just sort of following the passion, and the one thing that I really want to launch with you here is that specificity piece. It's not like you went out searching. You were following the things that were sort of natural to you. And then you ended up working with a specific population. And what jumps out further is knowing your personnel, knowing who you're working with, and knowing what they need to be successful. Is that so? How much does that play into sort of your interactions on the day-to-day, either with those that you work with, those that you're working with in specific programming, and those kind of things?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. So it's one of those things, like, so right now, one of the things we're actually doing at the Edmonton base is myself and some of my associates at respective levels, and even our boss, we're actually kind of campaigning around the units, because given the nature of just kind of the status of the world, and I see it as a very unique opportunity. I don't want to look at it as being something that was entirely negative, so to speak. And what I mean by that is that there was a lot of things as far as how we functioned, interacted with the units, our ability to deliver programs, our ability to deliver reconditioning and fitness and preventative type things. Our ability to do those things were not optimal. But unfortunately, there was a cultural thing that existed there, where the likelihood of us shifting that drastically anytime prior to COVID was pretty slim. Interestingly enough, COVID hits and it wipes the slate completely clean. Right. And we used to kind of jokingly say, as we were kind of starting to reintegrate, coming back to work and things like that, was that, they're not going to know different if we tell them that they have to come into the building on their hands backwards, because COVID has completely changed the entire look of what it is, our interactions with them, specifically, but just in fitness and organizations, businesses as a whole. So we had a really unique ability to come in and hit the reset button and say, what are the things that we want to change as far as how we interact with this population and how we deliver fitness and rehabilitation, all those things. So we're currently doing that, which is really, it's a unique opportunity. As I mentioned, it's an honor for me to be involved in that process as well, because I do get to bring some kind of unique things in perspective. And obviously I'm not from here, so I bring a unique perspective just in and of that of itself. But all that being said, when we talk about like specificity and things like that, one of the things that was happening prior to is that our ability to deliver was very reactive. So it was more them coming to us and saying, oh, we think we kind of want to do this, or, we'd like to try to do fitness 2 or 3 times a week. And it was kind of plug and play approach to programs. And what this opportunity has given us is now we're coming in and saying, that's not the way this needs to operate. Here are the things we can deliver. Here's the capacity in which we can deliver them. Let's sit down and actually have a conversation. You tell us what your goals are as an organization, or in this case, as an individual unit or company or whatever level we're working with. You tell us what your goals are. We'll tell you what you need to get there. And so, interestingly enough, when we talk about military population, the vast majority of the Canadian Armed Forces, this is a personal opinion, probably more than it is me speaking for the whole, but the vast majority of those individuals really are just general population in a uniform. And that's just the reality of the way most militaries are, though, realistically, particularly if you ask the infantry, they'll tell you that everybody else is pretty much not the military. They just wear a uniform, right? But that's kind of a cultural thing. But the reality is that the vast majority of them do works like trade work, mechanics, welders, they work as clerks, And so when we talk about specificity, the vast majority of these individuals just need to be a little bit stronger, a little bit fitter. And so I think that's one of the common misconceptions from the outside in when we start talking about performance within the tactical populations and things like that, is they immediately key on what they see as far as being a tactical population. Those are the guys that are rappelling down the sides of buildings and kicking down doors. And that's a very small percentage. I don't know what it is in the CAF, but to my recollection, when I first went into the Marine Corps, they talked about for every 1 infantry Marine, there are 27 or 28 other Marines that have to do their job well to facilitate them doing theirs. And so when you think about that from a perspective of specificity for training, that means there's probably 1 in every 28 people actually need the type of training that people envision as being tactical training.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting take from the inside, because I don't think most people see that. And most people see the appeal of, or the visual of exactly what you said, rappelling down buildings, kicking down doors. And I see the parallels here in sort of these little lights go off in my head as you're talking, to like the amateur sports space and training amateur athletes like they're the 162 game season Major League Baseball player, or the 82 game season, which is all they do is play that sport, and training kids like that because that's what they see and that's what they're exposed to. But yet that's that tiny 1 in 28, much greater than that. And that's what the exposure is. And therefore that seems like the most logical thing to do, is train them like little grown-ups. Is that sort of like a fair capture in terms of that assessment?
Yeah. And there are certain carryover factors. Like there are certain units that have everything from cooks to clerks to everything else, where the expectation is they are going to do some Army or military things. They're going to have to carry a rucksack, but it's pretty few and far between. And realistically, the expectation there is almost a traditional thing. It's more on the basis that they could be expected to do these things. And so they have training things that happen throughout the year where they're expected to do that. And that may be the only time they ever see those elements, which creates a unique problem for a lot of them, because they don't tend to do a lot of workup training for them, and they tend to come see me as a result. But it is kind of a weird thing. And like one of the more specific ones that I talk to with specificity in the military now is that one of the most traditional military exercises you can do besides throwing on a rucksack is going for a run, whether it's done in units, whether it's done individually. But it's one of the most common reasons. I think it actually is the most common reason that people get hurt in the military in the CAF now. or it's the leading cause for it. It may not be the
Right.
exclusive reason, but it's probably what exacerbates whatever the other weaknesses were that they had as a result of that, just due to the nature of repetitive stress that they get from doing 10K runs and things like that, particularly if they do them on a whim and they're not training up for them. And the interesting part about that is when you talk about it from a specificity standpoint, is that the vast majority of the military doesn't need to run ever, unless they just do it from a health perspective. But battles aren't fought that way anymore. And so specificity to running actually almost seems exclusive from my perspective for people that are infantry, that would be non-mechanized infantry, which is even fewer numbers of them. And then your CANSOF comp guys, so your tip of the spear guys that probably are on foot. Vast majority of everybody else gets flown or driven wherever they go. And if they're running longer than going to cover, which is probably, hopefully, no more than about 10 to 15 feet, something really went wrong. So it's not to say that it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a capacity to maybe do a 5K run just from a general fitness perspective, but training it is pretty superfluous to the equation.
Interesting, an interesting capture, and we appreciate the metric usage as well on the 5K run. On the 5K run, you've adjusted well on many levels. It's an interesting talk, and we capture similar things when we're talking with athletes on this side, like athletes that are playing a sport. That training element that everybody needs to, I just see so many parallels, and I'll just jump on a couple of them, but not that they're right or wrong, but Olympic lifting became very, very sexy and very appealing, and everybody's Olympic lifting. And there is this stream of thought that says, well, hey, like Olympic lifting is actually a sport in itself. So if you're training Olympic lifts, you're getting better at that sport, and perhaps not better at the thing that you're trying to get better at doing, either on the ice or the pitch or whatever it is.
Yeah. And we could have a whole other conversation about that. So
Sure, we could.
Part of that is the bias of me coming from being in the Westside Barbell conjugate community, right? But the conjugate method, without going down that road, is actually a derivative of weightlifting protocols. It was just applied by Louis Simmons to a powerlifting protocol, but it actually is a weightlifting protocol by its original design, which is neither here nor there. But the point being is that kind of their school of thought and things that I've adopted and evolved is that the reality, when you talk about people utilizing the Olympic lifts in training, the vast majority of them are wanting to utilize the Olympic lifts to develop explosive strength or power. Well, the unique kind of concept there of developing explosive strength, for instance, well, those conditions have been laid out for us multiple times. You need to be able to perform them in a way that you're so perfected in the technique that all you focus on is being explosive, which I've never met any Olympic lifting coach that comes in and says, what you need to do is just pull that bar as fast as possible and clear your mind of every other thing. Usually, if anything, they're being told to slow down. The sets and reps part to manage fatigue, sure, but then the individual's technical proficiency needs to be super high in it to even really get an explosive stimulus out of it. So really 2 out of the 3 things don't really make sense for those lifts. And if I was to argue it even further, I would say the best people in the world, i.e. those people that compete at an elite or world level stage in Olympic lifts, they don't use those lifts to develop those things. They use squats and jumps and presses. If the people that are the highest degree of proficiency in the world at those lifts don't use those lifts to develop those types of strengths, then I would beg to argue that none of us really need to. So I agree. I think it's one of those, and weirdly enough, when I would work with high school athletes, we would have to teach them those lifts, not because it would make them good at their sport, but because they're going to be subjected to them when they go to their university strength and conditioning.
Yes, exactly.
We had to train them to get ready for their own strength and conditioning programs, which just blew my mind. That's even a thing, right? But that's part of the machine that is collegiate strength and conditioning.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, it just resonates on so many levels, that capture of sort of just what is specificity and what are we doing, and taking a step further back, which you captured really nicely with the COVID piece, allowing the space to step back, to take to get out of the mud, so to speak, and see it from above, and see like, what can we do better? How do we interact? And more importantly, how do we deliver the best possible options? This reactive nature, I'm in a similar space where trying to flip it on its head and get to the progressive end of therapy, of strength and conditioning, of these ends of things, where if we're taking a sport and we're saying this is the cause of all injuries and the root of all evil, but we're going to keep playing that sport, perhaps we need to flip some things a little bit in terms of treatment and these kinds of things. How does that conversation get broached with you, with your team, with your staff? And I don't want to call anybody out or anything like that, but in a lot of environments, the reactive is just what's always been done. You wait for somebody to get hurt and then they'll come see you. And it's not like we're miracle makers and we're trying to try and clear the world of injury. We know injury is going to happen with certain unpredictable elements, as well as the predictable elements that have been studied ad nauseum. But in a lot of environments where I've been, a lot of conversations that I've had, it's the shift away from that old mentality or that old guard or that complacent, this is how we've always done it, those really scary words. How do you, or would you advise entering those conversations in terms of not to shake the tree, but to start to maneuver around reactivity and move towards progressive or proactive approach to care?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny you say that. So I mentioned the little campaigning thing we've been doing around the base.
Yeah.
The gateway drug, if you want to call it that, for us getting in is that it's predicated on injury prevention. And that's buzzwords, right? But when you actually ask people to define what that means, many of the individuals that you would come into contact with would be hesitant to answer that because it's either too complex or it's so vague that they don't really have a clear answer for it. The way that I define that when we go into these conversations is that the best injury prevention program is just a comprehensive strength program. And so, and it's, again, that is very, very vague in its nature, but that's the truth, is that if I can just do a nice comprehensive strength program with somebody, the likelihood, particularly for things that are avoidable, non-contact type injuries, goes down, or the likelihood for injury goes down significantly. So what do I mean by well-rounded? Well, the reality is that a lot of people, so I'll use Olympic lifting as an example, a lot of people have kind of a key, I would say 5 exercises that they think are the end all be all of strength and conditioning that should do everything they need, but they tend to avoid things like knee flexion or horizontal pulling, or there will be something like that. And what I always say to the individuals when they talk about like, okay, well, what is your recommendation? I say, well, let me ask you this. When you go to physiotherapy, do you do the same things that you were doing when you were in the gym? They're like, no. And I was like, they feel pretty antagonist to or opposite of what you were usually doing. Yeah, well, that's what I mean by comprehensive, is we just need to make sure that if you're pushing one way, you're pulling the other. And it's not rocket science, right? Like the vast majority of people that come through our facility, they are at the point where they need high degrees of variability. They just need to be on nice, comprehensive, steady progressions. And that's really the end of it. And ironically, that is very few and far between. Whether people are program jumping from one thing to the next based on what they find is sexy or cool at the moment, whether they're just saying that if you just run and do push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups, you're going to be in the best shape of your life. Well, maybe, but the shape you were in before wasn't great, so we're really not saying much, right? So, you know, that's kind of what a lot of those programs are, right? Like they have their wheelhouse of things that they feel comfortable or good at, and they just hammer them all the time. Well, no wonder we have repetitive stress injuries, you know. So when we talk about the idea of getting into like what that looks like and how it's delivered and how it's sold, I was like, I have 3 basic catchphrases that I sell to people, given the nature of the conversation, as to when I actually throw them out. Yeah. That first one is the one I've already mentioned, is that the best injury prevention program is a comprehensive strength program. The second one is one that I used when I was working with one of the athletes I worked with in the past, was Matt Grice. He's one of the more notable UFC individuals that I've trained with in the past. And he and I just had a very frank conversation one time. And he said, the reason I come here is because the one thing I can control in a fight is the shape I'm in when I show up. I was like, bing. I was putting that on t-shirts. I was doing all kinds of stuff. That was my tag phrase for the longest time, particularly when I was working with combat sport athletes, right? But it applies to the tactical population too. Like that's really the one thing you can kind of control in that space.
Yep.
And then the last one is the one that probably more directly applies probably to the conversation you and I are having. And my current role is that you do not build resiliency through avoidance. And that's one of the things too that's kind of unique and maybe almost contrasting to what we've already said, is that for those individuals, well, if I know you're going to be subjected to lots of running, then I can't avoid running with you. I've got to be smarter about running. If I know you're going to be subjected to rucking, I can't avoid rucking. I've got to be smart about how I apply ruck marching to your programs. And so when we talk about being reactive and things like that, sometimes that is the nature of it. Unfortunately, they're not going to come talk to us until they're at that point, and then we have to navigate what that looks like. But that's, again, the primary focus that we're making right now with all this campaigning, is we're trying to get in as a preventative nature before we get to the point where we're having to take that reactive posture. And it's with our staff, it's a shift, just because that's not how things were run at our location. It was kind of that same thing. This is how things are always done. As to why, I don't know, but that's not how we're moving forward now. So we can wipe that clean and just say from now on, this is how we move forward. But also it's a cultural shift for the military, at least in Edmonton, because when we have these conversations with these individuals, a lot of times when we bring light to the idea of what we can be involved with, how we can be involved, the types of programs we can deliver. Hey, you don't have to pick from this list of classes. You tell us what you want, and we'll build you a program. And people just are completely blown away by that. And I don't know why that culture existed before, where it was just this cookie cutter. Do you want to do a weightlifting class or a whatever class? And they're like, well, we'll do that.
Yep.
Like, now we're just telling them, you tell us what you need. You tell us what you want. We'll do an assessment with your people. We'll tell you what the starting point is. We'll develop a program. We'll sit down and say, does everything check out? And then we'll deliver it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And yeah, I mean, but the part that always blows me away is that, how has personal training been done for the last 100 years? Like it's not a new concept by any means. We're just applying it to the military, and people seem completely blown away by it. Yeah. So, but
I think it's fantastic the way that you can capture this in your space, and also acknowledge that this is kind of, I'm with you. Like, I'm blown away by this, because everything you're saying to me is just like ding, 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 in terms of like, it doesn't have to be overly difficult, but here's what you need. You need a comprehensive approach. Absolutely. How do you get to a comprehensive approach? You need a baseline. Right. And you need to understand the individual who's in front of you. If you don't do those two things, it doesn't matter how comprehensive your programming is, because you've missed the boat on what comprehensive actually is. You've missed goals, and you've missed the individual, and you've missed the components of things that they need in their life. And you bring up combat sports, and I had an opportunity through a friend of mine to work with an MMA fighter just in the past couple months. And he hurt his knee, and he came to me and said, that Jason told me I got to come see you because you know what you're doing. And I was like, listen, I do. I know what I'm doing, and sometimes, other times, I have no clue, and I haven't worked with many MMA fighters. So before we do anything else, you tell me what you need. You tell me what your sport is. You tell me. And he said, okay, this, and this. We start talking. We ended up, 2 hours down the road and talking about why he's training with Jason. And he's training with Jason because Jason does everything based on rotational volition and understanding how to get up and get down and move, and not falling into any sort of cookie cutter programming that beats him down to the point when he enters the ring, he's at 70%. All of it is geared towards walking through the door and being at 100%. And no matter if that's a combat ring, a baseball season, a hockey season, walking up the stairs when you're 85, that's what it's all about, is being able to be that combatant in life, right? Every day at your top capacity.
Yeah, I always talk, like my primary objectives when I was working with so to kind of rewind I still work with them to a degree. Like, I have people that will reach out to me periodically for advice, or I'll kind of help manage their last 2 weeks of their cut and things like that, and give them little like tips and tricks to help make weight, because they weren't doing their due diligence to get there earlier in their time. So we're having to figure out ways to get them there. But yeah, my two primary objectives, or actually one primary objective, when you combine them, and that's get you paid with your first paycheck. So when you have the potential to get 3 paychecks, depending on, now at higher levels, they have different organizational expectations for what their contracts look like. But effectively, you get your show money, you get winning money, and you can get bonus money. And so their show money is that they have to get passed by the medical screen by the physician, and they make their contractual weight. Those are the 2 things that guarantee they get paid. So I need to make sure you make weight, and I need to make sure that you're healthy enough you can pass your screen. Those are the 2 things. So interestingly enough, the vast majority of what I would do with them, aside from just general performance stuff, was maintaining their general health. So we did a ton of stuff, and I'll talk about that here in just a moment, metrics wise, that was more just making sure that we weren't getting to the point where I was overstressing their body to the point where we we're going to have a maladaptation.
Yeah.
And then making weight, which is part of that equation. So my metrics that I use with people, now I was fortunate at one of the facilities I had, because I had like an InBody and I had a Fit 3D scanner. So I had all these fancy numbers, but the primary things that I was going off of is we would take a baseline of their resting heart rate, their blood pressure, their body temperature, their hand grip strength. And then we'd take all their other metrics on top of that. And then what I would do is each time they came in to train is we would do their hand grip first. If they dropped by more than 2 kg, then I would take their temperature, their heart rate, their blood pressure. If they were elevated by heart rate was more than 6 to 8 beats per minute at a rest, their blood pressure had raised more than 6 in their systolic and 2 diastolic, and their core body temperature was close to a degree above, any one of those, or any 2 of those 3 things, excuse me, I'd send them home. So, and the reality is that it's that, what you mentioned. A lot of the MMA fighters are, particularly in Oklahoma, have wrestling backgrounds, and they have 2-speed. They're either on or they're off. And so they're training all the time. And one of the biggest things I had to do with them was make sure that they weren't training to the point where they weren't actually having any positive adaptation, because they don't have the recovery time, right? So that's a huge thing. So like a lot of our strength sessions were, we would come in and we would do like 5 to 7 sets of like 1 to 2 reps on a squat at a moderately heavy weight with big down times. You know, like just get a strength adaptation, do a little bit of accessory work, and then we would do movement stuff. So very reminiscent of like all the FRS stuff, like doing articulated rotations of the hip and shoulder and things like that. It was that stuff until it came time to cut weight, because the reality is, one, I can't replicate the same type of tired you're going to get in a cage in a gym. It just doesn't happen. I just can't do it. I can build cardiovascular endurance. I can build, muscular stamina and things like that to a degree. But most of their training sessions have elements of that already. So if I'm just hammering that every time they come in, it's the idea of like, I'm sharpening my knife and I never decide that it's sharp enough. And then sure enough, I look down and all I've got is a handle left. I can't do any damage with the handles. I might be able to use as a hammer, I guess, but the reality is that that's how their training goes a lot of times. So I want to think about it as we're sharpening the tool, not grinding it to a nub. And for most of them, that means I've got to actually pull off a lot of the things that people view as being traditional training for those individuals, because if I don't, they are going to just grind down. And it's really common for people to have to pull out of fights 3 or 4 weeks out because they get the flu or something like that. And I don't think it's because there's an immense amount of human contact. I think it's because they're so immunosuppressed from the fact that they're doing bad weight cuts. So they're just starving themselves, and they're training 2 or 3 times a day.
Right.
And it's just the nature. And obviously that's probably what I would attribute, even more so than the sport itself, why so many of them have chronic nagging injuries, hip, knee, shoulder, is that they're just dehydrated and under recovered. And they're going in and subjecting themselves to those types of stressors. And yeah, of course, I wouldn't expect anything less.
Yeah, it's such an amazing capture, and I really appreciate you sharing like all of these details. And for those that aren't in the space, or that are in the space but are in a different space, I think there's so many parallels. Like if we draw this over to the collegiate sport, and maybe not NCAA like Power 5 or anything like that, but if we just look at like university aged athletes and all of the requirements that they have in their life, no, they're not combat fighters entering a ring to get paid, but supplement one football game a week on a Saturday, and all of those other days that lead up to that, and classes, social life, family, making money, all these different things. And then like, what's your baseline for fatigue? Oh, you're not sore today? Okay, cool. Then we're going to bench, we're going to squat, and we're going to deadlift. And then we're going to do that again. And we're going to do that again. And we're going to do that again. And then we'll do some accessory work. And then we'll do some foam roller because you're sore in that spot. So we'll put a foam roller on that spot. And I don't mean to mitigate the fact that all of those things have value in their own right. But like, you talked about your baseline and like, how much are you sleeping? How do you feel today? Well, socially and emotionally, where are you at? Where is your mind at? What have you eaten today? What is your resting heart rate? What is your breath rate, your breathing rate on a daily basis? And like, these are really simple baselines that can tell us a lot about where a human being is at if we take the time to be a little bit more diligent, instead of, you need to get in the gym and get in the gym and get in the gym, or get in treatment, get treatment, get treatment. Like, go home, sleep, come back, eat breakfast first. And then like, let's do some breath work. Let's down regulate your nervous system. I just think we're all guilty of it at some point, and myself included, of like, oh, it hurts here, so let me focus on that and fix that thing that hurts, right? Or you're a fighter, okay, I need to do all of these things to make you a better fighter. So many great points, and I think they're just so many parallels throughout, and I want to go back just to that one point for the sake of diving into it a little bit deeper. The one point that you made about the common and repetitive stress being sort of like running, for example, being maybe the leading cause of injury or whatever. This is much the same in our general life. And then we go and we look at like, oh, okay, like you sit down too much, so you need to move. That's what's going to make you better. So let me show you how to like brace your spine and be in this neutral position for your abdomen and fully engaged and do all these things. It's like, hang on a second, like I'm still going to go back to sitting for 8 to 10 hours a day. So like, where is the access point? And where is the point that education becomes a part of this, right? And so educating your patients or your clients or your military personnel or your fighter on what they need, helping them see what they need, as opposed to just doing the thing to break them down, so that they're aware that Kevin Malahy was here. He did work with me because I'm sore today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's interesting. So the nice thing about it for us is we actually have a complementary part of PSP within our health promotion side. That's almost exclusively what they do. It's not exclusively what they do, but it's a big component to what they do is the educational pieces. So we get to tag team with them a little bit, kind of pass the torch a little bit on some of those things. But yeah, so I always try to do that when I'm working with people, particularly on an individual basis, which I probably have a greater amount of access to being able to do that than the average fitness instructor would, just by nature of what my role is, because we have more of a clinical undertone to what we do. But yeah, so my thing is like, if you were going to I'll use some of the FRS stuff, just kind of an example, like we're doing like just, putting somebody in kind of a quadruped position, hands and knees, and we're just going to look at abducting the hip. And, the things that really translate well, I'll give you a perfect example. I was actually working with one of the fitness instructors who had some back issues, and I was taking her through some of those drills. And one of the things that we have to do as part of the staff there is that we have to be able to uphold some of the same fitness standards that the military do. One of the things that we actually do is our own version of a swim call. And she had mentioned that none of us, I think there's only 2 people there that are actually naturally good swimmers. Every one of us is really have to like force ourselves to. I'm probably the worst one there. Ironically, considering I was a Marine, I always joke about it. I was like, yeah, I wasn't that kind of Marine. But anyhow, that being said, she made comments about, like in that moment, I was able to tell that, like I had really developed a lot of power in range in my hip to where I could whip kick a lot harder. And those are those moments I think that are really the best teaching tools, more so than just listening to me say it, because I think the implication of me wearing a shirt that has PSP on it, they already have this kind of understanding, like, I know you support it because it's your stuff, right? So there's a very different layer of being able to educate them once you've applied it a little bit and let them see how it works, and then be like, hey, that thing, that was this, right? And being able to once I'm able to draw one correlation with them, I don't care if it's tactical personnel that I'm working with now, or if it's general population or the combat sport athletes. I just need that one thing to fall into place, that they did well, but they're doing better, or that they did poorly and it doesn't bother them anymore, or whatever it is. I don't care necessarily what layer it's on, but something that has that direct correlation. Now I can educate them because I built the rapport with them to show them that what you're doing has value.
Yep.
And so I think that's one of those pieces that from an implementation, from an education standpoint, that I think we, being just fitness people as a whole, kind of do poorly, is we try to overload with information on the front end versus here's what we're going to do. Here's the things that I think we need to do. Let's start kind of working on these things and just kind of getting you moving. And then once I get that one thing working, now their ears are open, because now they want the information, because they're like, oh, this works. What else can we do? How can I do this better? Right? Yep. Now I've got their ear. So I think if we do a better job of not front loading people so heavily and get into more the actionable items, so to speak, it's the idea. It's like, you can have the best intent in the world, but if you don't have follow through, it doesn't really matter. Right? So that's one of the things that I like to do with people when I first start working with them, is I think they expect that they're going to get this onslaught of, like, here's my sales pitch, here's all the things I can do. And I try to give it to them like in 5 minutes or less, and then get them up and moving. Because I find, at least with the people that I first start working with, whether it's from a high performance standpoint or the rehabilitative standpoint, after about that time frame, I've lost their attention. Right. So that's a personal observation within the field, but that's something that I've evolved over time, because I like this stuff. I nerd out on it. I mean, I've got journals all over the place and stuff like that. Like I like it. Like, it interests me to the point where I read it recreationally. Yeah. But I also understand that not everybody shares that sentiment, not even the people necessarily within our same field. And for that reason, over time, I've learned to back off of it a little bit and be more on the actionable side. Again, as I mentioned, to be able to try to create that point A to point B in their mind, and then make them more hungry for the information then, and then being able to give them those types of things.
Yeah. This is intent versus impact, so to speak. This is the intention can be very, very good, but if the impact doesn't match that intention, then you got to revisit what that intent is and really find the impact. I think these are the pieces that we've touched on a few times in various conversations here through education, like formal academic education as well, where this can look like the greatest pedagogy ever if we write it down on paper. But when it comes to putting my kid in the class, if the impact isn't there, it's not, we got to go somewhere else, and the next part of it for me is also that actionable piece that you talked on. I put a post up the other day, and like, making it work for you was kind of like the nature of the post, and through my social media. And the thing is, like, athlete comes in, human comes in, lies down on the table and expects to be fixed. Right. And just with that one interaction, that cycle of dependency is hot already. The gasoline is already on the fire. So interrupting that dependency and creating that independency, I think, is just how you've captured it. And that's a little bit of education, not quite front loading it, but giving them enough that they understand this is why, this is how, and you're telling me, and I'm just sort of here to coach you to what you're telling me you need and want in your daily life.
Yeah, the whole teach a man to fish mentality of fitness.
100%. And just wellness in general. Yeah. Because a lot of us don't know how to fish when it comes to wellness, right? Like, my back hurts every day. What do you do every day? What don't you do every day? Like, why is it that your back hurts? Is it because, like, your back hurts? Or is it because, like, you haven't been active, you haven't done some other things, your sleep is terrible, your stress is high? Like, it could be any of these things. But if you don't know how to fish, you're just going to keep going to the store and buying somebody else's fish, and it's not going to turn out the same way when you can't. I could run with that analogy. We'll stop there. But you get it. I think, like, you really get it, and the delivery from this is like, if we can shift, if we can be a part of the shift, an external guide to people going a little bit more internal and showing people that actually like this, like the answer is actually within you and not me. Like I'm going to be here and I'm going to coach you and I'm going to show you and help you with things. But like, if you don't have the drive, desire, or the willingness to be comprehensive in your approach to like being a human being, then that back pain is going to always be there. And I think these are pieces that in the military, in combat sport, in our daily living, if we can be a little bit more diligent in delivering,
Right.
This doesn't need to be territorial, and this doesn't need to be sexy guy upside down, oiled up, doing push-ups on his head or tongue or whatever's on board these days. It just needs to be accessible, and it needs to be approachable, and it needs to be impactful. It needs to be the intent and the impact. And this has been amazing, Kevin. And I don't want to keep you too long because I feel like we could talk for another couple hours. And I'd love to get you back on here again in the future, because we could go down some of those lines in terms of Westside, Barbell, and a little bit more into the military side of things. But this has been extremely informative. And as a first conversation, I really appreciate that. And I know our audience that's here live and those picking it up appreciate it as well. So I'll thank you once again and let you sort of wrap up with any final thoughts. This is honestly, it's been fantastic. I think you might have just set the record for the number of notes that I've made during a session, and that's
all right.
7.5 pages. So
new high score. I like it. That's what I'm here for.
That's it.
No, yeah, I would say probably when it comes to like final things, my big thing with like a lot of the people that are out there, and you kind of hit the nail on the head with the idea of it just needs to be accessible, is that, in the military population is not unique to this. This is kind of people as a whole, is that, I've, to contrast, gone down the conjugate method, Westside, Barbell, who are kind of notorious for having things that people from an outside perspective that don't necessarily understand, like the physics nature behind like the accommodating resistances and all the things that they're playing with. It just looks like a lot of fancy, crazy variability. And there is elements to that, but what I would say is that, the people that you see doing that, you're getting a capture, right? They've been doing that stuff for 20 or 30 years sometimes, and they have to create that variability to create that stress to drive an adaptation. And the vast majority of the people that we come across, and I'm guilty of this too, I'm not that level of athlete. I just need to focus on doing basic things well. Mm-hmm. And, I kind of speaking to the crowd of people that probably are listening here, they probably are familiar with Kelly Starrett. I'm sure you're familiar with Kelly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I had the opportunity to meet him. He's like the nicest person in the world, which annoyed me because he's beyond smart. He's strong and he's really nice. I was like, I'll be bad at something. But, I steal his old catchphrase, which was, if you can't get out of bed in the morning and sit into a full range of motion squat, you don't function as a baseline human. And that's kind of my epitome of, I like doing strength training. I like doing high intensity stuff. I like getting out there and throwing my buddies and choking them for fun. Like that's what I do. But at the end of the day, when we talk about what it is that we really are striving for and that sustainability piece, it's just stuff like that. Can you get out of bed in the morning and sit into a squat? If you can't, we need to work on it. And I try to, that's one of those things that I try not to be the guy that says, do as I say, not as I do. I try to apply those things in my life. And I understand that it's hard to reel those things in when you see all the stuff that looks so sexy on Instagram and whatever else, as far as being kind of the motivation to get up and do your workout for the day. But I think that's just big picture for the vast majority of us. Those are the things that really we need to just kind of hammer home as being important, is just being able to function as a baseline human, and everything else should fit into place. So.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's absolutely incredible. And the Supple Leopard, that book, and the podcast, and all the things that Kelly does are amazing. And I think they're great resources, and all of those pieces. And I think that operationalizes, what I'm trying to do, what we're trying to do in terms of dialoguing with athletes and human beings. And through this podcast and great captures this evening is, if you can be a little bit better at being you from moment to moment, like you're going to last a whole lot longer in whatever it is that you do, whether that's moving a little bit better, getting a little bit stronger, combining those two things, eating a little cleaner, sleeping a little bit better, like whatever those pieces are. If you're getting a little bit better, I don't want to say minute by minute or 1% better or anything cliched, but like every day, if you do something to get a little bit more aware of who and what you are, you're going to be better off. And so get out of bed and move and do those things, because those are pieces that they're going to leave us at some point. So we might as well get really good at them while we can. And Kevin, this has been absolutely phenomenal, man. I really appreciate it. Again, it's session 92 of Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Our guest this evening, Kevin Malahy. He's out in Edmonton currently, from Oklahoma originally. What an amazing capture. And I'm so glad that you could make it on. Again, I'd love to have you back. 3rd Canadian Division Support Base, Edmonton, reconditioning manager out there in the Canadian military, and amazing stuff, man. I can't even find the words to capture it at this point, but I'm going to go back and listen to this again in the morning, and I'm going to reach out to you, because there's so much good stuff here. And I feel like there's a lot of alignment here as well, for not just for myself, but for everybody listening here live, and for those picking it up on podcasts as we release this thing. So I'll wish you good night. Thank you again. You got a couple extra hours over there, so you have a little bit more nighttime to play with.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for your time. I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, anytime in the future, you know where to find me. I'll be here. So.
I got you now. Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. And we'll go again next week, session 93. I think we have our 4th and final education piece in our Tommy John series with Drew Hutchison, who just finished up a successful season with the Detroit Tigers, pitching in their starting rotation, as well as coming out of the bullpen down the stretch run here for them. We're looking to line that one up, same place, same time, same channel. Next week, it'll be session 93. Kevin Malahy, thank you once again. Have a great night, and we'll talk soon. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online, firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback, consult@firststartherapy.com, CONSULT@firststartherapy.com, on Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.